Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Have you ever wondered, what the heck is my path through this organization? Welcome to Talent Optimization with Tracy Shirk. And today we are having a conversation about how do we create meaningful talent pathways through our organizations, and how do we ensure that our staff actually know that they exist. So with me today is Derrick Carter, and Derrick is with us from Hendricks CareerTek. Derrick, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being with us. And I have to say, I'm just thrilled that you're joining us, not only because of the position that you hold right now at Hendricks CareerTek of really partnering with education, partnering with students that are, middle school, high school age, along with employers in our region, but also because of the path that you've taken to kind of get to where you're at as being that regional marketing role with ABC Supply Company, really ensuring that for that sales and marketing organization, you had the talent pathways in place to have the right people in the right seat at the right time.
Yes, it's been very interesting, my career, in terms of being able to be in sales and marketing. And as you said, how I got here, started out with a job just in sales, and of course, learned a lot early on in my career and always have had a passion for sales, and eventually worked with ABC Supply as a regional sales and marketing manager. And they're, I think, pretty instrumental in terms of helping people develop their skills and increase their customer base and helping managers grow their sales and profits.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derrick. So I'm curious, if you think all the way back to your days at UW-Eau Claire and, that very first kind of position for you, did you know what your career pathway was going to look like?
No, quite frankly, I actually went into Eau Claire as a computer science major. And I was very fortunate to get an internship when I was a sophomore. I had an internship with Cray Research and was in their data processing department. And it started as an internship. And then after a year doing that, they actually hired me full time. So I actually worked and went to school full time for 2.5 years. But it was there that I kind of felt computer science really wasn't the path that I wanted to go, because being in front of a screen all day, and it's quite ironic that we kind of do that now because we're using computers so much. Right. But I felt like I've always really enjoyed working with people. And so decided to look at business and focus more on marketing, and really change my direction from computer science to marketing.
So I'm super curious, as you looked at, changing that direction, was there anything laid out within Cray or a mentor within Cray that really helped you kind of see what that vision was, not only for your career, but for that next position within the organization?
Well, at Cray Research, no, there wasn't really a mentor there from the standpoint of developing my career at that point. But I did have mentors outside of Cray. I had two very instrumental individuals, both of whom were in sales and marketing. It's kind of interesting, but they had a very significant influence on me. And I really loved how they approached life. I loved, their career path and talking about the things that they had accomplished. I think that kind of influenced me to really go down that path in terms of sales and marketing. So while at Cray, there wasn't really a mentor per se, it was more of a job. I think at that point, it turned into helping me get through college and helping me pay for college, because I want to believe it was maybe around my junior year, second semester, that I really began to think about going into a different direction. So having that job, it was a very good paying job for someone in college. And like I said, it was more about then just kind of helping me pay to get through school as opposed to a career with that organization.
Thank you so much for that, because I think something that's really important is, as employers, we're looking for certain things with individuals. And it may be, hey, we're looking for someone for 1 or 2 years. We're looking for someone that can build their career with us. And based on kind of those seats that we have, what the organization needs and what the job needs, we can then start to target our recruitment to that, but also know that, hey, here's where these next steps are to ensure that we have those pathways into and through the organization. Mm-hmm. So, Derrick, I'm really curious about, there's 3 key things that we had chatted about a little bit earlier when we talk about talent pathways. And I know that you implemented these very successfully at ABC Supply in your 14 years there. And I know that this is something that you're working really closely with the employers now as you're partnering with students. And that is recruiting staff, training staff, and developing them. So I just want to break these down into those steps. Tell us a little bit about how you can recruit staff all of the time and ensure that there's a pathway that they see.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really important that HR leaders understand that recruiting is an ongoing process, that if you just simply hire someone when you need an individual to fill a spot, sometimes you don't make a good decision, find the right person to fill that seat because it's more of a need right now, as opposed to trying to find a person that's going to really have an impact on the business or within that position. And so I think that with having a mindset of recruiting both externally and internally should be a consistent mindset. And it depends upon what type of area you're in, but it's about asking customers, it's about asking family members and friends about people that they know who may have an interest in that type of opportunity, or understanding who your competitors are and who is the best person in that position, so that when there is a need, maybe you can reach out to that person to start talking or create a dialogue about those opportunities. And I think from the standpoint of recruiting as well, it's about how the company conveys their message and talk about their culture and what's important to the company. And so that students or people can understand how would they fit in with it within that culture. Culture is extremely important for a company. And I'm also really into branding. I think you have to brand your company, you have to brand your message. So having that information that's in a package so that people can totally understand who you are, what you stand for, where you're going, that's extremely critical in the recruiting process, because people need to be able to identify with that to make sure that they're a good fit, right? It's about the company trying to decide if that person is a good fit, but it's also that individual have to decide if the company is a good fit for them. And I think once those 2 things come together, that's the starting point of really making a great relationship and being able to then look at how do we train and how do we develop that individual along the proper pathways.
I love what you just stated about that it definitely is a 2-way interview versus just that 1-way interview. But it's also, when we're interviewing here at Elevated Talent, we like to look at this as the head, the heart, and the briefcase, right? So the head is essentially, what are those behavioral traits that you naturally have? And when we look at those are things like, hey, I naturally am an independent driven leader versus I am naturally a leader that really works through my team, right? So knowing that really knows, hey, here's a behavioral trait that this specific position needs, and knowing what our talent pathway through the organization is. As I grow, I may need more detail orientation, or I may need more independent leadership. So we can know, hey, how individuals grow based on that, right? So that's the head. When we look at the heart, that's really looking at the culture. What is the culture of the organization? What are those shared values, beliefs that they're serving? Are we really community oriented? Are we, family oriented where we want that blend? Or are we one where, hey, 80-hour weeks here is normal? And, both of those are okay, but we just need to know what the individual wants for this stage in their life is aligned with what the company needs for them reaching their business goals based on their current business strategy. And then third, of course, is looking specifically at the education, the experience, et cetera. So thank you so much, Derrick, for lining that out and allowing me to kind of, weave through how we do that with our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the way to really be able to develop that and understand, particularly the heart, is the company have to have the structure in place where someone, a mentor, is working closely with that individual so that they get a chance to really understand how that individual feels and what their behavior patterns are. Because it's not a one size fit all. It's a one-to-one relationship. And until that takes place, it's very difficult for perhaps the employee and the employer to really accomplish their goals. So I totally agree with you. I think it is extremely important that those things are identified. And that, I think, kind of fits into the training piece as well. So with the training, it's about setting clear expectations for the employee. Because oftentimes when an employee comes into a new job, they're not really sure about what to do. And that uncertainty can cause a little bit of frustration. So if the expectations are set, then I think it'll make it a little bit easier. Assigning a mentor to help them through that process would, I think, be another critical piece. In fact, I would even submit to you that I would probably have that person identified early on before that new employee is hired. So when they get brought on board, there is someone to introduce them and say, hey, here's an individual who's going to help you through the process. And then understanding the timeline for as they go through the training, because the training is about, what are they going to learn tactically and instructionally to do the job? So understanding what the timeline is at each station or the areas that the employee is going to work in order to understand their job. And I think, the elements or the components of the job, making sure that that's detailed for the employee as well. And then I think that there's a need for periodic meetings between the employee and that mentor or their supervisor to sit down and talk about, hey, what's working for them? What's not working? Where can we improve? What do they need help? Having that structured kind of a sit-down meeting, I think, really gives the employee an opportunity to share their thoughts as opposed to wondering, who do I go and talk to about this? I'm really challenged right now. But I think just having those kind of guidelines in place will make that whole process much easier.
I love what you just said about the intentionality of the planning for that training. And I'm going to circle back to the recruitment conversation earlier. I know one of the questions that is asked so often in interviews is, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? And one of the challenges that I always have for managers is I want you as the manager and leader inside the organization to answer the question of, where do you see this individual in 5 years as far as their career path planning? What promotion opportunities do you see for them? And actually sharing that with the individual. Because so often as mentors and managers, we have the ability to see individuals bigger than they see themselves. And then that floats into those mentoring, training, coaching conversations with our staff. So I'm curious, have you ever done anything like that with your experience?
Yeah, I think that that's a very important point because one of the things that happens, particularly with managers, so for example, in sales, managers could have a driver who basically has great communication skills, very great with customers, but at the end of the day, they kind of see something bigger for that driver, right? Oh my God, that driver, you really need to be in sales. Well, that may or may not be the case for that driver, but sitting down and talking about that and introducing that concept to the driver, it may be a situation where, hey, no one has ever really talked to me about it. I'd like to learn more about it. And through that, that could really be a career path for that driver. And quite frankly, it was never even considered when he came or she came on board, right? So I think that you're absolutely right. Those situations are critically important to have that kind of dialogue to recognize those talents and put in place a game plan of what is that next step? Where do you want to go? And how do we help you get there? I think that that's a very salient point is how do we help you get there and helping that person reach their career goals and aspirations.
Yeah. And sometimes things aren't as obvious, right? So we utilize, and most of our listeners utilize a tool called Predictive Index, where there's actually a job match there that'll say, hey, this person's an 8 out of a 10 match, where we can then take a look at those and actually bring that up in the conversations, because it's something many times the managers and the employees don't see either. But sometimes when you have that independent tool that's looking specifically at those behavioral traits, you can go, oh my gosh, this is the easy button to at least solicit the conversation and having another way to look at it. So thank you so much for sharing that, because that leads us right into this developing, right? Is how do we develop our staff? And one of the key things that, you just talked about is, hey, we're giving opportunities. And I think so often that when we look at what you not want to do is as if not more important than what you do want to do. So I want to tell a story before we jump into this, specifically to your position at Hendricks CareerTek, where you're really working with middle school and high school students and introducing them, much like you just said that you're doing at ABC Supply, to a myriad of different companies and opportunities. But both of my boys have gone through Hendricks CareerTek programs. And, my son Quentin is like, Mom, I will never do computer programming. I absolutely hate it, but I'm glad I had the experience. And the welding, maybe I want to know it and do it on the side, but I never want to do it as a career. But man, when I got to get into the hospital stuff and the medical stuff, that's what I want to do. And can I get more experiences like that?
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, because one of the things that we really try to do here at CareerTek is we want students to explore. We don't want them to have to come in and feel like they know exactly what they want to do. And I submit to you that the majority of kids feel that way, right? There are those outliers that know exactly what they wanted to do, like when they were 6 years old. They want to be a firefighter because their dad was a firefighter, their uncle. But many kids don't have that luxury. And so what we try to say is, look, explore as many things as you would like and get a chance to see, is that something that is appealing to me? And if it isn't, like you said, it's equally important to identify those things that aren't. And so we're really proud of the way that we approach it and to give students those kind of opportunities so that they can see what direction may be the best for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Now, leading back into how we develop individuals through organizations, I know you have a ton of experience with this specifically. And I think having that roadmap of, hey, I can see that there's a leadership track. I can see that there's potentially a specialist track inside of an organization. Tell me a little bit more about how you've seen that done super successfully and how you've kind of done that as well.
Yeah, the one thing I want to just say before I get into that is I want to make a very clear distinction that there is a real fine line between training and developing. Sometimes I think those kind of get merged together, but developing is taken it to a whole nother level. It's about really, as you said, recognizing that talent, but sitting down and having those discussions with the individual and trying to understand, where do they see themselves? Where would they like to go? And on a continuous basis, during not interviews, but during reviews, employee reviews, that's a great opportunity to really start talking about where does that employee see themselves? As you said, going back to that 3 to 5 years during the interview, that should be something, in my opinion, that's constant throughout their career, because it's about growth. And how are we going to know how that person is going to grow unless we have some idea of where they want to be 3, 4, 5 years down the road? And I think it's also about recognizing how well they're doing in their current position. What are some of their strengths? What are some of their weaknesses? And how are we maximizing those strengths? And how are we trying to improve upon those weaknesses? So to me, it's an ongoing process in that manager and that employee working together and creating that roadmap along the way so that they know exactly what needs to be done to achieve that next goal. And I think that it's important, too, that an employee should never be surprised, right? If something happens, it should not be a shock to them. If there's that clear communication along the way, both parties will know whether or not that individual is either exceeding those expectations, meeting those expectations, or falling short of those expectations. And I think that also is going to be able to drive the growth of where that individual goes, because while we may recognize in the beginning there are certain talents, but it also is going to depend upon the position in the future, right? Will those same talents be applicable or skills be necessary for that next position? If not, what do we need to do to try to make sure that that person has those additional skills in order to reach that next level? So this is a situation where it's ongoing. And that's one of the things I really liked about my position at ABC Supply, is that being able to work with salespeople and managers on a continuous basis to try to help them really get to where they wanted to be. That was perhaps the most rewarding in that role.
Thank you for doing that differentiation between training and development, because that is a really key point that so often just gets jumbled into one. And I know you've worked with hundreds and hundreds of folks over your career. So do you have an example of when a young person found early success because the company had a very well-defined process?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we just placed someone with a company this past December, a young lady, a single mom, and looking for a career. And because of the company structure, they basically allowed that individual to work in different areas of the business. And she found her niche and absolutely loves it. And she's thriving right now, doing an extremely great job. But I think it's, again, because the company allowed her the opportunity to kind of get a flavor of different positions within that organization to make sure that she was in the right seat on the bus, if you will, right? Because that really allowed her to have the confidence that she needed in order to be successful. If they would have just maybe hired her, put her into one position, maybe it would have worked, maybe not. But I think because of that situation of experiencing those different areas was really the catalyst for her being successful. And I think on her way to a very good career with this particular organization.
What a win, not only for her, but that's a huge win for the organization of increasing your retention, but also ensuring that your business strategy is aligned to your business results by creating that well-defined people strategy so that those outcomes are met, and not just based on what the HR leader's idea of that is, but the managers and the executive team. So thank you so much for that story. And as we wrap up, there's always two questions we ask. What do you believe is one key takeaway for our executives listening in today?
I think the key thing is that executives should make sure that they understand that they're going to be the key to making this happen and making it successful. That there needs to be that structure built around the recruiting, around the training, and the developing of the employees. If that structure is in place and metrics are set, then you can begin to see whether or not it's working. And if it's not working, where are the deficiencies, right? And so at that point, one could put in countermeasures as well. But I think the leadership, in terms of the CEOs, they have to make sure that this pathway and strategy approach, it permeates throughout the organization, that everyone knows in middle management how important it is and how they're going to be measured. Let's face it, people, that's the greatest asset for a company. And oftentimes I think individuals get so wrapped up into their job, they forget that. And they forget that it really does take an investment of time to make sure that these things happen. But if you don't have good quality people in the right seat on the bus to be able to perform their job at a high level, that's really going to have a negative impact on the company. So it's important that each company does that to make sure that those key things are in place. And I believe if they do, and like I said, develop metrics that you can hold people accountable, I think that'll make things easier for employees to come on board and have a potential pathway of success.
Absolutely, because what gets measured gets managed, right? And ensuring that those timelines are there as well, because there are certain things that need to happen within a certain period of time, but then there's some longer timelines that are definitely needed, right?
Exactly.
What's one key takeaway for HR professionals listening in today?
Well, I think HR executives and the personnel need to be in a position where they're executing these strategies or this process. And they have to make sure that the people that are involved in terms of the managers and supervisors, that their constant communication with them as well, right? Again, I think that having some type of quarterly meeting to make sure, are we on the right path? Looking at attrition, what's going on with attrition? Are we at a level where we're able to retain our people at a high level? What's the industry standard, right? How do we index against that industry standard? And again, what are the countermeasures that we need to put in place? And this is something that I think is always should be in the forefront, continuous improvement. I think if someone looks at their model today, that may not be or should not be the model of tomorrow, because there's external stimuli that's constantly changing things and you have to adapt. And I think HR has to lead the way to meet the needs of the current situation with potential employees, right? You mentioned communication. How we communicate with young people today is extremely important, right? And we have to make those kinds of adjustments. But I think there has to be someone that really oversees that process and makes sure that the folks that are responsible for developing these individuals, that's happening and we don't let people fall through the cracks. Because I think that oftentimes we look at the individual as the one that's really, well, they left because they weren't a good fit. Well, sometimes it's the environment as well, right? And the human resource department and the managers, they're responsible for that environment. They're responsible for that culture, right? It's easy to point the finger at someone else, but anytime you lose a person, I think the question should be, what could we have done differently? And challenge yourself to see if there's a way to take that situation and make an improvement so that it prevents another person from leaving.
Absolutely. And we say here at Elevated Talent all the time, we believe every individual has a right and a choice to be fulfilled in the work that they're doing. And the leadership team inside of organizations has an obligation to create the container for individuals truly to be fulfilled in their work as aligned to what that business strategy is to reach those business outcomes.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly.
So thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about Hendricks CareerTek or Derrick Carter, you can find him on LinkedIn. And in the show notes, we do have links to Hendricks CareerTek. If you're interested in a program that is really leading edge as far as creating opportunities for young folks in our communities and really partnering with organizations to create those talent pathways, take a look at what Hendricks CareerTek is doing, because they're doing phenomenal work. So with that, if you are interested in learning more about how you create those talent pathways in your organization, please join us for our upcoming webinar within our Talent Optimization Foundation program, where we will lay out these key steps to building those step by step for you inside your organization. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.